the time we have remaining, I want to pick your brain just for some editing tips that can hopefully help improve mine and everyone's listening fiction. So let's talk a little bit about characters. What are some of the best ways to avoid stereotypical characters and to create proactive characters rather than passive ones? What are some tips just for characterization?
I like to have people like answer BuzzFeed quizzes as their characters. I think that's a fun way to get to know like what your character would do, is to kind of, take online quizzes in their persona and, find out, do they like their marshmallows burnt or lightly toasted? Just all the little things that kind of make up a character. Plus it's fun. And other than that, I think, what makes proactive characters is, high stakes and a great premise. If you're not starting from answering that question of, what does my character want, you're going to have a pretty limp storyline.
And is there such a thing as a character that's too passionate about what they want?
I think only if that character is idealized to a point that they don't have flaws. That's when we would call something like a Mary Sue character, which is typically a stand-in for, the author themselves, and is just like too perfect and gets everything they want really easily. Like that's just it's not interesting. Even superheroes have flaws, so that's, they can be passionate and they can be, do-gooders if you want, but they do need to have a flaw.
Oh, I sympathize with those writers. It's difficult for us walking around perfect, looking at the rest of flawed humanity. Oh, it appears to really be challenging you, imperfect humans. Oh, that's good. So let's talk a little bit about plotting. How important is the book's opening, and how much time do you spend on that opening to make sure you're getting readers in the door at the front versus the rest of the book?
It's super important. I mean, for me, even as an editor, like I don't read the entirety of all or even most of my submissions. I might give something 50 pages. So openings are really important to me and how I consider things. And then once I've acquired something, I'm going to want to be really sure that the opening is gripping down to the first sentence. And that's something, of course, I'm going to share with my colleagues and see how they feel about it. But yeah, openings are vital.
And so do you prefer like a strong, what makes a good opening?
It could be voice. It could be stakes. Hopefully it's both. I like to use the example of the first chapter of The Hunger Games, which you look back on and you think, oh, that must have been the reaping, right? But it's not actually. It's Katniss in her little tiny home and with her sister who's asleep, and she's thinking about, how she's going to feed her sister, and she's, looking at her sleeping form and realizing, you're kind of taking in their house and how poor they are and what the situation is. And it does a lot of things, right? It establishes her love for her sister. It establishes the family's poverty. And then the next scene is the reaping. And that's where her sister gets called up to stage and she says, no, I volunteer as tribute. So when that happens, we already see how much she loves her sister. So there's so much more impact. And it also has great voice. So that first chapter does a really great job of setting up kind of the stakes, and the voice is really great.
A great example. It hadn't occurred to me. You're right. It doesn't open with that with the passionate moment. Huh. Well, I'm watching our clock, and it always flies by. Where's our time go, Wally? I have so many questions for you, and we're nearly done. So why don't we do two more,
sure.
And then we'll call it a podcast. One I'm obsessed with is what's a good way for a writer to effectively tease out their novel's theme so that the reader, finishes the book and they're like, that was a good story about a girl and her serial killer. Hang on, that was about capitalism. I understand what the author was trying to say from a large extent. So what's a good way for an author to tease out those themes without becoming too preachy?
I mean, I think so much of that is instinct. But I do think if you're setting out to tell a story to convey a certain theme or a certain message, you're probably approaching it from the wrong place. The reader really has to be invested in the story and the character. And as much as I'd love, to read a book that makes me hate the current administration, I think if you're writing a book for that purpose, it's going to feel didactic. It has to be something that comes up a lot more naturally. It needs to be a lot more subtle. I do think Harry Potter is a pretty good example of themes that just sort of happen to be there below the surface, but the story isn't really about that. So I think reading widely, and thinking about your favorite books and saying, oh, well, what was the theme behind that? And seeing how obvious or not obvious you think it is. And even how that's progressed over time. Like, obviously, C.S. Lewis really hit people over the head with some of his themes. And I think when you look back on those books now, you really see that, and you see that there are possibly better ways to do that than contemporary fiction.
Yeah, but his readers were in danger of hellfire.
I guess he just had to.
There's so many more questions about editing. I wish I had time to ask you, because I know I could talk your head off all day, but I won't. I want to be respectful of your time, so I'll wrap it all up with this one question. If there was one piece of advice you wish that every author and publishing professional listening or watching would take to heart, that you think would make better their career and make better their writing, what advice would you impart to them?
Either do your research or know your market, which is sort of the same thing. But I think it's really important to know, as a writer, we focus so much on craft and on telling the best story we can. But it's really important to know what the market is that you're writing into. It's important to know what's selling. It's important to know how to query an agent, who the good agents are. It's important to know what your contract says down the line, to be really literate when it comes to your rights and your income, and to really just treat it like a business. So I think it's a better way of saying it. Treat it like a business. Your writing career is your business. It's not just a passion or a hobby. Like, if this is what you want to do, then you're in business for yourself. And you should kind of treat yourself accordingly.